Armor in Monster Hunter has a much deeper meaning than mere equipment for us to wear. Alongside our weapon of choice, the set we select determines our advantages, disadvantages, our limits and capabilities, and slowly through the game's playthrough, we adapted and adjusted to fit our own personal playstyle. The impact they have gameplay-wise, mostly through their inherent skills and decoration slots, is palpable and crucial for the player's progression and an extremely important quality to ponder whenever we are picking what we are going to use. But more often than not, especially in the late game, that is not the only factor that we take in consideration. This series is very visually driven. The monsters we fight, the weapons we use, the equipment we dress. All of them are unique, distinct and with a style or theme attached to it. Their aesthetics are vibrant and flavorful, making us want to craft them not solely for their stats, but also for their appeal. After all, fashion hunter is a term that exists for a reason. The further we progress in game, the more we care about their designs, about how we want our character to look like. Ever since the launch of the franchise's first entry that both these factors, mechanical and visual design, have been a fundamental and paramount focus towards many aspects of these games, including armor. With the release of World came many changes. A vast amount of features and systems that the original player base was used to was drastically changed or improved, turning the series into a smooth and player-friendly experience, especially for newcomers. The success of World is unquestionable, but despite it having a numerous amount of improvements under its belt, not all of the changes were beneficial. Last week I talked about the sad story of weapon designs in Monster Hunter World and how terrible the end result was regarding that specific component of the game. Go take a look if you're interested. And while many people usually say, well, at least the armor sets didn't get the same treatment, unfortunately that couldn't be further from the truth. While the issue weapons have is easily identifiable, armor sets were affected just as harshly, if not more, but in a different way. I understand that for many of you, especially the ones who only played World and onwards, that what I just said may make no sense. I mean, the sets look fine, both old and new ones. They don't suffer from the slap-on designs like weapons do. But just to make sure everyone is on the same page, I will now briefly describe the new and old gen armor mechanics as well as how they work, and once I'm done with it, I promise you that you will understand how bad this really is. Back in 2018, World introduced to the series a brand new armor system. When slain, each monster offers to the player two separate sets, Alpha and Beta, with a few exceptions having an additional Gamma set later in the late game. All of them share the same defense values, elemental resistances and skills. But each armor group has its unique visual style and focuses on different parameters. Alpha sets possess more skills or higher skill levels, while betas have less skills but own more gem slots for decorations, making one a more restrictive and focused set and the other a more customizable one. Players are free to mix and match them however they see fit, allowing them to easily tailor their armor, making set building extremely flexible. But before the 5th generation came along, armor worked in a somewhat similar way but with a few key and important differences. Back in the old days, sets were divided into two separate categories: Blade Master and Gunner. As the names imply, the former was exclusive for all melee weapons and the latter for ranged ones. You could not mix them up at all with the exception of helmets. Here, each group was a lot more distinct from one another. Blade Masters had almost double the defense, while Gunners had one extra point in all elemental resistances. At this point, you might be wondering how is this new system worse than the traditional one? The old iteration was a lot more strict, So why would someone not prefer the 5th gen set customizability? To a certain degree, you are correct. Freedom of choice and flexibility is always the most beneficial concept for players. The problem with Worlds specifically is what and how much was taken away, especially from gunners. Let me explain. Defensive stats were not the only thing differentiating these two categories in the old titles. Both their designs and their skills were significantly different. When it comes to aesthetics, generally speaking, Blade Master armor was bulkier, with big shoulders or enhanced features. Their large size emphasized their main characteristics. This was armor made for close quarter confrontation. Gunners, on the other hand, weren't necessarily leaner, but had a smaller frame and focused more on decorative ornaments like capes and the like, often having an asymmetrical design where the left side was larger and or more detailed than the right. And the reason behind it was that their left arm was the one holding the gun, with its pose naturally placing it in front of the body. Gunner armor was lighter and its defenses were strategically placed where it matters the most, to allow users to maneuver more freely. Of course, that doesn't perfectly reflect in-game, but the methodology is what's important here. Now, when it comes to skills, both sets shared the majority of them throughout the different armor pieces, but some of them, usually between 1 and 3, would be switched up depending on the type of gear. As an example, ignoring the different skill system, both Tigrex armor sets had Gluttony, Attack, Psychic, and Spirit skills. But Blade Master also had Handicraft and Sharpener, while Gunner had Loading and Recoil. This meant that each set was tailored specifically for the type of weaponry they were assigned to. Of course, this also means that players basically had only half the sets available to them, and if you liked how the gunner gear looked like but you are a lance user, well, too bad, you can't have it. This has always been the biggest downside of this system. It was too restrictive when it comes to visuals. Capcom, at the very least, did a good job in making melee users not wanting gunner sets for their stats, since each category offers skills combinations that only favor the type of weapon they are using. I mean, a greatsword player is gonna benefit nothing from having loading or recoil on their build, so it wasn't all that bad. But the design limitation was always a huge bummer, and that's why people were so excited with the changes World was going to make. Way before the release of the game, they announced that finally armor types wouldn't be exclusive anymore. People could freely mix them together in any way they want, and for veteran players this was exactly what they were asking for. The problem, however, is that without us knowing, this came with a massive caveat. In World, each set looks different from one another, that is true, but the gunner designs were completely annihilated. In fact, it is even worse than that. In most cases, beta sets are a simple variation of the alphas, and in more severe ones, they are nothing more than a color switch. The design distinction between them no longer exists. They are either variants of Blade Master armor, or they barely change at all. Gunners were completely left behind, not just style-wise, but also on what matters the most: their stats. Despite them no longer having only half the defense like they used to be, their skills were heavily affected. Just for all of you to get an idea, in World there are 9 skills exclusive for range weapons. Things like normal shot, sleep functionality, special ammo boost, and so on. Going as back as for Ultimate, however, the game had not 9, not 18, but 28 gunner-only skills, 2.5 times more than World. And not only there were more of them, they were also more mechanically varied. Skills to reload faster, have less recoil, add extra bullets per shot, have more ammo, increase the potency of each type of ammo, be able to use any kind of ammo. Yes, players still have access to some of these perks through their bowgun customization, but that's the point. Some of them, not all. And to make things even worse, not only they have less dedicated skills to work with, the skills themselves are not spread out evenly through the different monsters, meaning that a big percentage of the roster doesn't provide with absolutely nothing useful for gunners whatsoever, making ranged builds extremely restricted and uniform. This situation is arguably worse than the slap-on weapons because in that case, the issue is solely visual. Here, it is not only visual, it directly affects gameplay. Having the gunner set design gone was already bad, but the fact that a huge amount of their skills was removed and the few that remained were poorly distributed throughout the roster makes this a genuine problem. And I'm thoroughly convinced that the community is not more vocal about it because, let's be honest here, most of us don't use ranged weapons in the first place. But the ones that do were heavily affected by these changes to the point that it seems to be pure neglect. Should Capcom revert this system back in Wilds? Absolutely not. The idea behind players having the freedom to wear armor in any combination regardless if it's ranged or melee is a massive step forward, and it is something players wanted for the longest time. But their execution in World was nothing short of abysmal. Fortunately, the solution is pretty simple. Re-add the old gunner designs for the beta sets and distribute range dedicated skills more evenly. That's literally it. It is a complete net positive for everyone involved regardless of the weapon they possess. Melee users would have more style variety to work with, and ranged players would regain the tools and designs they always had and deserve. A huge thank you to my Patreon supporters for supporting the channel and the content I create. If you wanna join the ranks, you can do so for only $1 a month, the link will be in the description. Don't forget to leave your thoughts and opinions down below, join our Discord server, engage with the community, and I hope to see you all next time.